Video interviews are an important part of any marketing strategy, and when you're marketing your film, they should absolutely be part of your campaign. I just released an interview promoting my newest short, Debtor's Hope, and thought it would be a great opportunity to do a video on how to shoot video interviews. There's 4 things you need to keep in mind when shooting interviews: your location, lighting, camera, and sound. If you get these 4 things set up well, your interviews will have high production value, cinematic quality. When it comes to choosing your location, make sure you choose somewhere that looks clean and well kept, not somewhere with lots of clutter. If possible, you'll want to choose a location that matches the branding of the project you're working on. For example, in all the promotional material for Excellent Films, I lean towards a black and red color palette. It's in my logo, it's on my website, and everywhere else that my brand exists. So, when I shoot a shot like this, I'll throw a red light in the background, hitting me with a red edge light to tie this shot and the whole video together visually with the rest of my brand. Another common way to take control over the environment you're shooting in is just by building a set. I've done this in a number of scenarios, and it's an excellent way to take your projects to a new level. Now, if you're going to shoot against a nice wall like this, don't shoot where the wall is directly behind the subject parallel to the camera. Instead, shoot at an angle to create some depth in the scene, and if possible, have some more things in your background, like a plant or a table, to add some additional intrigue to the shot. Creating depth is an essential part of getting a professional look, and the more depth you can get in your background, the nicer your shot will be. The second thing to consider when setting up for your interviews after you've chosen your location is your lighting. Often, people have the misconception that professional lighting involves getting rid of all the shadows in a scene, so they'll position 2 lights at the front of the subject at the same intensity. But really, lighting isn't about getting rid of shadows, it's about controlling them. Shadows are another important factor in creating depth. I recommend using 3-point lighting when setting up for interviews because it's simple to learn, easy to replicate, and only requires 3 lights. To illustrate it for you, let's start by turning everything off. The first light is called your key light. This is the main light lighting your subject and should be positioned about 45 degrees above your subject. You don't need a protractor to get the angle right, you can just approximate and you'll be fine. Now, you'll notice that since the light is off to the side, there's a shadow cast on the other side of my face. Our second light is going to fill this shadow in, so it's called a fill light. Again, this light should be positioned about 45 degrees above your subject on the other side. Notice the second light isn't as bright as the key light and leaves part of the shadow still visible. This is exactly what we want. Creating a cinematic image is all about creating depth, and shadows create depth. Good lighting isn't about eliminating shadows. Rather, lighting is about controlling your shadows. The last light is called a backlight because it's positioned behind the subject, technically lighting their back. You can see that when it's turned on, it gives a rim of light around the edge of my body. Now, normally you'd position this light just out of frame, but for this shot, I really like having it in frame so it adds a little extra dimension to my otherwise static black background. Now, if necessary, you may also want to light your background if it's too dark. This isn't always necessary if you're shooting in a location that already has some light from windows, for example, but you'll definitely want to at least think about if you need to light your background or not. If your background is a bit plain or uninteresting, or if there's a large section of blank wall like you see behind me, pointing a light at it and flagging off part of the light to cast a slash of light across can also be a great way to add some interest to your shot. In this case, I just have an Aperture 100D with no modifier being cut with a $3 poster board I got at Meijer. Also, consider if you want to have overhead lighting in the room on or off. Usually it's best to turn the lights in a room off and just light your scene using video lights. But sometimes you'll need to leave them on so your scene doesn't feel too dark, especially if you don't have the equipment to properly light your background. Either way is fine, just give some thought as to which one you feel like looks better while doing your light setup. The third thing to make your interview look and feel as professional as possible after choosing your location and setting up your lights is to get your camera ready to shoot. You'll want to set up the camera using a tripod. Don't just have someone hold it the whole time. You'll want to make sure to position your camera to face the side of your subject that has a shadow on their face, not the same side that your key light is on. The next time you watch a movie or professionally produced video, pay attention to what side of the subject the camera is on. 98% of the time, it will be the shadow side because again, shadows create depth and that's what makes your footage look professional. You'll want to have your subject looking off screen with more space in front of them than behind them in the shot. Often, when doing interviews, I tell the person I'm interviewing to ignore all the equipment and lights, and that we're just going to have a conversation like none of it's there. All the cameras and lights can get really intimidating. Doing that helps put them at ease and takes the pressure off. As far as camera settings go, you'll want to shoot at 24 frames per second and set your shutter speed to 1/50th of a second to get realistic motion blur. If possible, set your aperture or f-stop as close to f2.8 as possible, and keep your ISO as low as possible. If these settings are still too bright and your ISO is as low as possible, turn down the intensity of your lights. And if your lights aren't adjustable like that, just move the light a little ways away from your subject until the exposure is correct. By moving the light source back, it makes the light less intense on the subject. Don't just increase the f-stop or shutter speed, but if you have to because you can't get the intensity of the light where you want it, increase the shutter speed before you increase your f-stop. If possible, shoot in 4K, but if your camera doesn't shoot in 4K, don't worry. 1080p resolution is perfect. On your main camera, set your focal length to around 50 to 70 millimeters if possible, but really anything over 35 will be fine. And set up your camera so that you're shooting from the waist up. If you have a second camera that you can use, position it on the shadow side of the subject as well. You'll want to have the shot a bit more zoomed in the 70 to 135 millimeter focal length, and shoot a little tighter from around the chest up. If you don't have a second camera, that's completely fine. One is all that's necessary. But if you have a second that you could record on as well, the second angle will make editing the video much easier. When it comes to focusing the camera, you can either use autofocus or manual focus. If you use autofocus, let the camera focus on the subject and then turn the autofocus off. This way, the camera doesn't try and focus on something else in the middle of the interview. If you're already focusing manually, I recommend getting a small flashlight and holding it where the subject will be when you get your focus. When the light is out of focus, it will appear larger, so you'll know where your subject is in focus when the light is smallest. The last important part of shooting a professional interview after your location lighting and camera is sound. Sound is actually the most important part of your video because people will watch a video that looks bad but sounds good, but no one will watch a video that looks great but sounds terrible. If you have the equipment for it, you can boom a microphone overhead like I normally do, but it's usually easier to just attach a lavalier mic to the subject and capture the audio that way. The audio can then be recorded either directly into the camera through the mic port or into a recorder and synced with the audio afterwards. When setting your recording levels, set it to around -6 to -12 dB. So if they laugh or speak or say something a little louder at some point in the interview, the audio doesn't clip or distort. To recap, I'm going to set up a scene really quick to demonstrate everything I've talked about so far. First, I'm going to set up a scene in this room where I shot the lawyer scene for my recent short film, Debtor's Hope. I'm going to position the camera off to the side at 70 millimeters, with the whole room in the background, and then have the person being interviewed face screen left. My key light is going on the opposite side from the camera, and the hair light is going to be about 180 degrees opposite the key light. Then my fill light brings up the shadows a bit. Then I'll blast the light right at the ceiling, which is going to reflect down off of the ceiling and light my whole background. And finally, I'm going to set up an aperture 100D pointing directly at the wall, and set up a poster board to cut the light so that it looks like there's a slash of light coming in from the window. My camera is set to 24 frames per second, 1/50th shutter speed, f2.8, and the lowest ISO I can get it to, and still have a good exposure. My second camera I'll set up with the same settings, zoomed in a bit more than the first at 150 millimeters. Then I'll boom a shotgun mic over the subject so it's just out of frame. Then I'm good to record the interview. And that's the four most important parts of shooting professional interviews. But really, there's one more thing that's even more important than all of that, and that's the actual content the subject is talking about. Once you get everything set up, your job is to help them communicate the message that's in their heart as well as possible. After you ask a question, listen to their response. Nod along and smile like you actually appreciate what they have to say. And when they finish answering a question, interact with them before moving on to the next one. If they said something that you could really relate to, tell them that and tell them how you could relate. Often, after hearing your feedback, they'll have even more they could say about it. By doing this, you're helping the interaction feel more conversational than like an interview. As the interviewer, the pressure should always be on you, not the person you're interviewing. Let them be as comfortable as possible and do everything in your power to help them share what's inside of them and set them up for success. Video interviews are an important part of any marketing strategy, and when you're marketing your film, they should absolutely be part of your campaign. Interviews with the director, the cast, the DP, etc. In the campaign for my most recent short film, I incorporated an interview with the lead actor to go on the Excellent Films YouTube channel. My goal in this channel is to help equip you with everything you need to know to release the vision already inside of you. So, I've put together a guide on how you can shoot your next film in the next 7 days with nothing but a turkey sandwich. I'll walk you through how to develop, shoot, and edit a high-quality film on a $0 budget in the next week. You can access it through the first link in the description, and I look forward to working with you in producing your next film.